Welcome back, everybody. It's Ian Collins in for George Galloway. It is the week on TalkSport. There's a whole bunch of stuff rumbling along here, including, of course, the TUC March tomorrow. Estimates range between around about 200,000 to 1 million people may well turn up to complain about coalition cuts. Let's speak with Heather Wakefield, who is the head of local government from Unison. Heather, good evening.
Hello.
One of the criticisms, Heather, I've heard today, a couple of people on Facebook, on our Facebook page when we were discussing this, made the point that the march tomorrow doesn't seem very focused, and there are so many issues that it's difficult to define specifically what it's about.
Well, the march tomorrow is a march for the alternative, and I think those of us in the trade union movement and from community groups and families who are going are very clear that we need an alternative to the social vandalism of this coalition government, and that there are some very clear alternatives to the massive cuts and the damage that they're inflicting on our economy. That alternative is one which is based on chasing the £120 billion of unpaid tax by making the banks who took our money when they wanted it repay what they owe, by chasing the offshore funders of the Tory party to get to tax their enormous wealth.
It's an anti-conservative march, isn't it, really? That's what it's about. It's anti-capitalism, it's anti-enterprise, it's anti-Tory.
Well, it's not anti-enterprise. It's certainly anti-Tory, and it's anti-Lib Dem, because it's anti the coalition.
Where were you guys? I mean, you talk about social vandalism. Where were you guys in the last 13 years with your big march ideas when the country was being vandalised with irresponsible spending and borrowing? Where were you then, Heather?
Well, that's not true at all.
The deficit. Of course it's true. How can you come on national radio and say that's not true? Of course it's true.
I can say that very easily. The deficit at this point in time is much lower than several other developed countries.
So you're telling me all was tickety-boo under Labour in the finance department?
No, of course not. Of course not. But Labour borrowed in order to bail the bankers out of the mess they're in, and that accounted for a lot of the public borrowing.
They were borrowing way before that, of course. All right, okay, what about when the Labour donors were giving money, the offshore characters, to Labour? Where were you then? What about when the banks were enjoying so much freedom that Thatcher wouldn't dare have given them that much? Where were you then, Heather?
Oh, I'm absolutely clear that deregulation of the banking system, which was also continued under Labour, was wrong. And I wouldn't.
But where was the big protest?
Listen, this government is absolutely decimating our public services and decimating our economy.
You know that is only about your own left-wing ideology rather than what's happening. Do you really think David Cameron woke up on the first, whatever day it was in May, in power, looked out the window, took a sniff of fresh air and said, what a lovely day to decimate our public services?
I sort of do, actually.
Do you really believe? Why would he do that? What a stupid thing to come on radio and say, Heather. That's what you believe the Prime Minister said.
Well, if you let me get a word in edgeways, I'll tell you. We have a cabinet of multi-millionaires who can buy their way out of anything they want. They have no idea what it is like to live on benefits, to depend on our health service, to depend on local government services.
So even though the Prime Minister depended on our health service.
They live the kind of lives
that
90% of our population will never come anywhere near. So they don't have a clue.
So you really think that's what... I mean, this sounds like a Hollywood film script. It's brilliant. You really think that because there are some millionaires in the cabinet, and there were some, and some of the shadow cabinet, by the way, so they should also go, should they? You're going to call on Ed Miliband tomorrow to get rid of all his millionaires?
He doesn't have too many.
Oh, is it in numbers? It matters how many you've got.
Listen, are you interviewing me, or are you just going into a diatribe of your own?
I'm trying to separate the claptrap from the cobblers, to be honest, Heather, and it's proving quite difficult, because this sounds like a kind of just an anti-Tory, slightly envious rant about people who've done all right for themselves, and then you're making stuff up as well.
I'm not making anything up at all. The deficit could be dealt with in a very different way. The deficit is nothing like as big as it's been painted by the government. The deficit in the years after the Second World War was twice, 3 times as big as the deficit now, and the creation of the National Health Service and our welfare state was the precise thing which got us out of the economic hole we were in. What this government is doing is driven by pure anti-state ideology, and what it's doing is leaving us with, at the moment, 2.5 million unemployed and rising by the day. It's leaving defenceless elderly people who can't afford to pay for adult social care without care. It's raising the bar on all kinds of access to all kinds of public services, and the privatisation of the NHS is going to leave it in tatters. Be absolutely clear about that. There is no doubt about it.
I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff there, Heather. I mean, firstly, you say the privatisation of the NHS. I don't think you would find anyone in the coalition that would say it was a privatisation. It will still be free from cradle to grave. They are, of course, carrying on the Blair plan, the Blair and Milburn plan for the NHS. It's really just a continuation of that. So in that respect, you would still be having very, very similar things happening under Labour. And in addition to that, you talk about Tory ideology. I mean, that's not a bad thing if you're a Tory, which I'm not, by the way, but if you're a Tory, surely ideology is something you should be following. But secondly, Tory ideology doesn't usually get rid of police officers and defence and courts and prisons. That's not Conservative ideology.
Oh, they're not getting rid of police, actually.
Well, there you go. That's so is it? Tell the Police Federation that, because they seem to be thinking that they're going to lose coppers.
Well, certainly there are lots and lots of teachers going. There are teaching assistants. There are massive redundancies already in our NHS. And, of course, there are some police going. Police support officers are being made redundant all over the place. So there is no doubt that our society, by the time this bunch have finished with it, will be a less healthy, a more unsafe, less caring, less cohesive society. And they don't care. It's absolutely clear that they don't give a monkey.
Do you seriously believe? I mean, you're talking almost about a kind of a group of. If this was in a film, this would be an alien breed you're discussing.
Yes, I think they are.
Do you really believe? I mean, the hatred you have for people who happen to call themselves a Conservative is astonishing, Heather. You sound like a kind of a student rebel that hasn't quite grown out of those teenage rebellious years yet. This is just about Tory hatred, and you're making stuff up in order to fit your own idea of what they're about.
No, not at all. They have absolutely no mandate for what they were doing. Nick Clegg, who's equally culpable, said immediately after the election that not a single frontline service would be damaged by what they're doing. And what we're seeing today is meltdown of our social services.
There's a lot of scaremongering going on here, I think, Heather, isn't there?
I don't think so.
My union,
Unison, is monitoring by the day.
Well, there are changes, but why is it bad that there are changes? Why shouldn't there be changes? Why shouldn't the state be smaller?
Because many, many people in our very low-paid society are wholly dependent on the state and unable. Pensioners on the state pension cannot afford private health care.
Well, they haven't got to have private health care.
They will have to.
Hang on a sec. Now you're really making stuff up, Heather. What do you mean? You're telling me now, you're announcing that Unison are saying that pensioners have got to get private health care?
They most certainly will have to get private adult social care in their homes, and GP commissioning is absolutely the first step to the dismantling of our health service.
Why is it? Why does it have to be the dismantling? Why are there GPs that support this? Why did Alan Milburn support this?
Well, Alan Milburn didn't actually initiate GP commissioning.
Alan Milburn was the man that said we've got to get rid of the national out of NHS.
There are many things which Labour did to our health service and our public services that we didn't like. But they invested massively in the health service.
With no success.
That's why waiting lists were reduced massively. That's why the quality of healthcare went up, and that's
apart from cancer, heart attacks and strokes.
In our society, when you ask them, the vast majority of people say they are highly satisfied with our NHS. When you have a privatised healthcare system, there is a
We don't have one.
We are about to have one, and there
Says
is a
who?
massive hemorrhaging. There will be a massive hemorrhaging of public money, which is paid as shareholder premium. It will be paid as very large salaries to consultants from private companies who do the scoping exercises. There will the amount of service we will get for our money, the bank we will get for our buck, will be reduced massively.
No government ever put more private into the NHS than the last Labour government
Well,
did.
this
They
government
changed the face of it.
is about to multiply
You can't run it without any kind of private element.
This government is privatising our NHS.
But you're saying that because that suits your own ideology.
It is about to deliver our NHS, in its own words, to any willing provider. And we know who they are. They are the large American health companies. They are companies who are not running efficient health services in the States and elsewhere. The US health system is the most inefficient health system because so much money is drained off into administration, into bureaucracy. We have a very, very efficient NHS in comparison, and this government is about to wreck it, and nobody should be under any illusion of it.
Okay, all right. Heather, thank you for coming on with us. Heather Wakefield is the head of local government from Unison. They're her views that the NHS is going down. I mean, did you ever hear such left-wing poison and bile come out the mouth of anybody as the woman you've just heard tomorrow? That's the kind of character that's on the march tomorrow. That's the kind. You listen to that. What was that really all about? And where were they? Where were the TUC? Where were all those people when private care was being injected into the health service? Where were all those people when offshore tax-avoiding multi-billionaires were donating to Labour? Where were all those people when banks were being allowed to get away with anything they liked? Where were all those people when a record amount of elderly people were dying in the NHS? Where were the TUC then? Where were the TUC and others when we had record amounts of kids leaving school who couldn't read or write? Where were they then? Where were all those people? 08717 22 3344.